Hello and welcome back to Unreligiously. My name is Lauren, and today we are going to be diving into one of the most requested videos, and it's the IBLP, the Institute in Basic Life Principles. If you're around the fundy snark or fundy worlds, you've definitely heard of this before. This is a video that I've been wanting to make for a really long time, but I also knew that it needed to be done with care, because we're going to be talking about the IBLP and all of the different ways that it affects its members. Beyond actually participating in the IBLP, this will probably feel very familiar to a lot of you who grew up in high control religious groups or fundamentalist religion. The IBLP mirrors a lot of these types of practices and they promote it, and so it might feel familiar to you as you watch. I would love to hear about it in the comments. If you've never heard of the IBLP, you might be familiar with the Duggar family from 19 Kids and Counting, or the documentary that came out on Netflix called Shiny Happy People. The IBLP is an organization that kind of shaped the conservative fundamentalist world. It's a conservative, authoritarian version of Christianity that has done real and lasting harm to so many people. This isn't just a critique of theology. This is a deep dive into how one organization weaponized and continues to weaponize scripture to control people's lives, especially their thoughts, their emotions, and their sense of self. So grab your coffee, grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's dive into how the IBLP shaped a generation and what it's going to take to unlearn it. The Institute in Basic Life Principles, or IBLP, was founded back in 1961 by a man named Bill Gothard. He's a conservative Christian teacher who claimed that he had discovered biblical principles that could fix pretty much everything that's wrong with society. Wouldn't that be nice? Families, schools, and churches, you name it, he could fix it, and a lot of people believed him. They wanted to believe him. It actually began as a seminar series called Basic Youth Conflicts, which was aimed mostly at parents and teenagers.
Relationships. Life revolves around them. In a marriage, at the workplace, with the family. And while we want these relationships to be all they should be, we so often cause them to deteriorate through anger, tension, deceit, conflict, and many other destructive problems. So how can we change? We need the Bible. And that's why the Basic Life Principles Seminar was developed. Believing that Scripture contains all the answers we need, this life-changing seminar is designed to help you learn those answers and apply them to the everyday struggles and problems that we all face.
The Basic Seminar deals with all the basic issues of life.
If Scripture is already spoken on it in principle, don't ever ask for another sign. You may get it, but it's not going to be God.
I was overwhelmed with just the simplicity of it.
It really gives solid answers to a lot of questions that Christians have.
We're running around for all kinds of counseling, and the counselors are giving you counsel and medication for the tormentors, and it's not working. Why? Because you'll never solve the problem until we get the strongholds torn down.
You know, taking that stronghold back, that part there where the teaching through the seminar was to overcome that stronghold. I just had never heard it taught that way. And it's not only with me, but my wife too, made a significant impact and opened our eyes.
We can ask ourselves two things. What character does God want to build in my life through this irritation? And what fruit does He want from my life because of allowing it?
It helped me right away with the basic conflicts part. I started seeing why things irritated me.
Long-standing marriages, I mean like 30, 40 years, 50 years are breaking up. Why? Because these marriages failed the chief test in a marriage.
But we now require all of our staff to go through the Basic Seminar, which guarantees us at least the fundamentals of the faith being applied
I recommend the basic seminar to all that I come in contact with because it works.
I thank God daily.
This was the 1960s. The world was changing pretty fast. There was civil rights, rock music, feminism, and the sexual revolution. And a lot of conservative Christian families were scared by this, like totally overwhelmed. Gothard stepped in with what felt like a lifeline for these parents who didn't know how to parent in this new age, and he gave them a neat, ordered system that promised them safety, stability, and a return to God's design. A design that would ultimately protect their children, keep their families intact, and make sure that their children would grow up knowing God.
Exciting ministries the Lord has entrusted to the Institute this year is the Journey to the Heart. This 10-day retreat allows young people to step away from the distractions of their school and work to focus on strengthening their walks with the Lord.
Journey to the Heart helped me with my attitude toward my parents. It helped me toward my attitude toward God, life. It gave me a whole new perspective on things.
And it didn't stay small. Over the next few decades, it turned into an entire way of life. Not just sermons or advice from Bill. I'm talking about a full-blown system with rules and teachings for basically every part of your existence.
The Institute organizing family conferences like this one in Big Sandy, Texas, reinforcing their faith and values. Nightline was there in 2011. So were the Duggars.
Long time no see.
He launched a homeschool program called ATI. It's the Advanced Training Institute, where kids don't use normal textbooks. Instead, they use something that's called wisdom booklets, which were basically little devotional packets disguised as school curriculum. There also were strict modesty rules, bans on unapproved music, or even instructions on how to choose a spouse, figure out what career you want to end up in, how to raise your children, and how to run your household, complete with the gender roles and purity culture to boot. There were training centers across the US and around the world where young people were sent for discipleship and often ended up being unpaid in their labor, and it was just wrapped in spiritual language. Here's what made it all so convincing to the people that actually participated in IBLP. Gothard did not present these ideas as suggestions that you might want to think about implementing into your family. He claimed that they were universal spiritual laws.
Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, devoted followers of the Institute in Basic Life Principles, a fundamentalist Christian order that promotes strict purity and control in gender roles, where the family must obey the father.
We believe in honoring our parents. We're Christians, but we don't believe honoring is the same as obedience.
Even if you're an adult, even if you've been an adult for a long time, you're married with kids, if your parents don't give their blessing, then you're not honoring them.
Like, if you followed them exactly, then God would bless you with a good health life, a great marriage, children that are super easy and obedient, no problems, financial success, and spiritual protection. But if you didn't follow him, you were opening the door to suffering, illness, failure, broken relationships, spiritual attack. All of it was framed as the natural consequences of disobedience. At the heart of all of it was this one core idea. Every single part of your life needed to be brought under biblical authority.
Weighed down with the responsibilities of caring for a family, it's easy for us just to want good character to happen.
Hey, give me back my truck. Ow, stop pinching me. Kids, can't you just love each other?
But good character doesn't just happen. You see, the character that God wants us to have is actually a reflection of the nature of Christ. Good character is not to be viewed like a cap that you twist on the bottle of bad behavior. Good character is Christ in us, replacing our nature. We are instructed to teach children to do what is right. But according to 2 Corinthians 3:18, our focus is on our relationship with God. And then good character happens.
Your family structure, your emotions, your friendships, your finances, even your private thoughts, even the thoughts that you just think about throughout the day in the privacy of your own head. And this is really important, you guys. When Gothard said biblical, he didn't mean the Bible. He didn't just mean the Bible. He meant that this was his personal interpretation of the Bible, and that interpretation was hyper-patriarchal, deeply authoritarian, and designed to keep power at the top of a rigid hierarchy. The hierarchy worked kind of like this. Men were the ultimate spiritual authorities, and then women were supposed to be quiet and submissive, subservient homemaker types. Then there's children, and children are expected to obey without question, especially when it comes to their fathers. One of the most infamous things that Gothard taught was something called the umbrella of authority. If you've ever seen IBLP materials, you've probably seen it. It's literally a graphic of umbrellas stacked on top of each other. The top is God, and then comes the father, and then the mother, and then the children, and sometimes there will be church leaders or bosses or your church or other Christians thrown in, but at the top is God, always is God. Then it's always the father, then the mother, and then the children. The idea is that if you stay under the authority from above you that's been given to you by God, then you're going to be protected. You're going to stay under the blessing that God has for you because you're living the type of life that He would want you to live. But if you step out from that umbrella, you are intentionally choosing to step away from God's designed protection for you. If a woman speaks up against her husband, or if a child disobeys their parent, or if someone questions their pastor, or Bill Gothard, for example, then you're outside of God's protection, and what happens to you is kind of your fault. Now you're vulnerable to consequences like spiritual warfare, sickness, broken relationships, or even personal disaster. And this wasn't taught like it was a metaphor. This is treated like it's a spiritual law, that if you break the system, then you are bringing judgment on yourself. That fear shapes everything. It shapes how families functioned in the IBLP, how decisions were made, and especially how abuse was handled and how abuse victims were treated, or in many cases, even ignored. This whole idea of authority wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. You were taught that obedience wasn't just good, it was godly. And questioning authority, that was rebellion. So from the very beginning, the IBLP wasn't just about biblical values or family morals. It was about building an entire worldview rooted in fear, control, and rigid gender roles.
Much. My mom and my sisters do. They go to the library and go on the internet, but we don't have it in the home because all the dangers with pornography and all. So
we found a computer that gave us protection that would really protect our family from any bad stuff coming in. And so really that's the only reason that we would even consider allowing the computer in the home.
And because it was wrapped in religious language, dressed up as faithfulness, it felt sacred and untouchable and unquestionable to the members. That's what made it so hard for people to clearly see, especially when they were living inside of it. The system didn't just tell people how to live. It tells you what to think, who to trust, who not to trust, and how to view anybody outside of the system. It tells you what books to read, what music to listen to, what you should never listen to. Doubt is considered dangerous, questions are considered rebellion, and anything that is from the outside world, from a secular perspective, whether it's science or therapy or medicine or even other churches, it's viewed with deep suspicion and sometimes even hatred because they're seen as an other. It creates a really isolated environment where your entire reality is shaped by Gothard's teachings, not the Bible. And it's crazy because you don't even notice while it's happening. That is the foundation everything else in IBLP is built on. Let's talk about something difficult and that can't be sugarcoated. Trigger warning here because we are going to be talking about abuse towards children. The IBLP created a culture where child abuse didn't just happen occasionally. It was enabled, justified, and oftentimes it was covered up. In Gothard's world, children were not individuals with rights or voices. They were extensions of their parents' authority, and that authority, especially for fathers, was nearly absolute. One of the most disturbing teachings in the IBLP was that a child's suffering was oftentimes a result of their own rebellion, or even worse, that it was part of God's plan to teach them character, whatever that means. If a child was being mistreated, the emphasis wasn't on protecting them. It was on asking, what lesson is God trying to teach you through this? Or are you being bitter? Or have you forgiven enough? Are you working on your heart enough? Physical discipline, including spanking with tools, with implements, was normalized and even encouraged.
Yes, the book To Train Up a Child focuses on corporal punishment for children and babies as young as 6 months old. They recommend in there using switches and paddles, PVC pipe, tree branches, as well as cords, different things, just all types of suggestions for hurting your children. And they don't want to see a reaction. Any reaction while you're being abused is considered rebellion, and you're going to receive much more if they see a reaction. If you try to move, if you try to protect yourself, that is seen as rebellion. And so I definitely had plenty of experiences of that, because as a child, what is your natural response to do when in danger or when you're in pain? Is to run. That's everyone's natural reaction. But you have to really learn to compartmentalize and just shut down and dissociate from what's actually happening. And that is horribly traumatic in the moment for the child, but even now as an adult.
I would say that it was actually almost mandated, with them quoting scriptures like, spare the rod, spoil the child. This would tell parents that if they didn't engage in corporal punishment of their children, they were in effect spoiling them and ruining them for the future.
My dad was a big fan of the IBLP doctrine, and he would look at the Duggars family as the model family that he wanted us to look like. I grew up, there was 9 kids in the family. I was the oldest daughter. So as you can imagine, I was very parentified and took care of my siblings quite a bit. Early on, my parents read the book To Train Up a Child by the Pearls, and my dad implemented that religiously into his teachings to us. And his discipline method was very much so like the book, although I feel like he took it even further. The women are supposed to submit and win over their man with silence and submission. And so my mom wanting to raise my siblings and I differently was a form of rebellion. My dad was a big fan of things like the blanket method, where you put a literal baby on a blanket, and if they get off, then you hit them. It's horrible. I can't count how many times I watched my siblings get beat, and myself too, if we didn't eat our food properly. I mean, he literally force-fed my brother his barf after he couldn't eat his food. Because my brother barfed, it was this ultimate act of rebellion against my father, and so he forced my brother to eat it. Interesting to note is my family from the outside looked fairly normal, at least in our community. There was a lot of people in the area and in the community that had similar teachings.
In many cases, emotional abuse is reframed as correction, and sexual abuse is often spiritualized or completely silenced. Victims were taught that to report abuse was to bring shame on their family, and by extension, by God. They were pressured to forgive their abusers really quickly and without any sort of justice, because bitterness was framed as a sin worse than the original offense. Or they might be told something like, if they don't forgive their abuser, then how do they expect God to forgive them? And if the abuser was a father or an older brother, cough cough Duggars, or a pastor or someone under the umbrella of authority, it gets even worse for the victims.
Eldest Duggar child, Josh, had been married for 3 years.
There's many different definitions of courtship, but for us, it meant really choosing purity, choosing to wait for a lot of things that people would take for granted. So our first kiss was on our wedding day.
Just 4 years later, Josh acknowledged he molested 5 girls when he was just 14, including 4 of his sisters. Jill says she told authorities about the abuse. Josh never faced charges. With damage control, Jill says she and her sister Jessa felt they had to give an interview to Fox News to protect the family brand.
It was like, okay, we need you to fall in line here and do these interviews for the show, go here, do this thing and that thing to kind of rally the troops and get it back together.
Jess and I were talking, we're like, oh my goodness, most of the stuff out there is lies, it's not truth. And so for truth's sake, we want to come out and set the record straight.
I was surprised to read that Josh was in the room.
Yeah.
Off camera.
Yeah. Watching the way that my parents kind of protected my brother, but then used me and some of my sisters, it was hard, and it's still hard to swallow. There's one point where I call my dad out about it, and I just say, you treat me worse than you treat my brother, my pedophile brother.
In 2021, Josh was convicted of receiving child pornography and is now serving 12.5 years in prison.
Because to accuse someone in spiritual authority is seen as rebellious in these types of communities. So many stories from survivors follow the same heartbreaking pattern. The abuse will happen, a child is then blamed and silenced, which is abuse further, and then the abuser is counseled privately, not reported to the police, not sent for professional help, not removed from the home or the environment of the child, and then the victim is told to move on, to forgive, and to submit more fully. Bill Gothard himself, the founder of this entire framework, was accused by over 30 women, many of them teenagers, of grooming, harassment, and inappropriate sexual behavior. And when he eventually resigned in 2014, he was never held criminally accountable. The organization just simply reshuffled things a little bit, denied, and then kept moving on. This isn't about isolated incidents. It's a system built to protect image over people, authority over truth, and silence over the safety of your actual group members, the people that you're there to serve. And the effects are lifelong. Many survivors of IBLP-related abuse experience complex PTSD, religious trauma syndrome, and deep distrust of themselves, others, or even God. This can actually destroy people's relationship to faith. The IBLP didn't just fail children. It gave abusers the tools that they needed, the permission that they needed, and the theology they needed to justify their actions. And it told victims that their pain was a sort of God's divine plan or lesson. Now let's talk about another major pillar of IBLP life, purity culture.
As Jill grew from a teen on 19 Kids and Counting to a wife and mom, starring in a namesake show, Jill and Jessa Counting On, appearing on multiple covers of People magazine. Jill's courtship with her now husband Derek was a central plot line in the family's reality show, the couple following strict dating rules, having chaperones, limited touching, and no kissing.
You had courtship rules. What struck you as odd, if any of it?
It was unusual. I wasn't used to being 25 and having to have someone with me at all times.
Derek dipped me for my kiss.
Their very first kiss was on their wedding day, a ratings bonanza with TLC's cameras rolling.
If you were raised in or around the system, adjacent to it, then you already know that dating isn't just discouraged, it's demonized. The IBLP promoted courtship as the only biblical alternative to dating. But this wasn't about forming healthy relationships, it was about control. Courtships meant that romantic relationships were initiated, monitored, and essentially controlled by the parents entirely, usually the father or an older brother. A young woman couldn't just have a crush on somebody, have feelings for someone. A young man would first have to go approach her father, get his approval, and only then would she actually even be allowed to consider being in a relationship. The idea was that God would use a father's spiritual discernment to protect his daughter from heartbreak, temptation, and most importantly, obviously, from sexual sin. But all it really did was strip young women of their autonomy and shame them for completely natural feelings and desires.
Jill also says small acts of independence, such as wearing pants and getting a nose ring, were met with hostility.
Anyone who is making decisions for themselves that the parents don't give their blessing, that's seen as rebellious.
Sexual purity wasn't just emphasized, it was idolized. Girls were taught that their virginity was the most valuable thing that they had to offer, and it was compared to a gift, a piece of tape, or a crumpled rose. If you gave it away, you were damaged goods, worth less worthy of love, or defiled. If you grew up in a high-control religious environment, or you were more conservative fundamentalist, you've probably had these same type of object lessons. I think the difference between the IBLP and some of these other types of mainstream religion are really, the line is very thin, and I think that in a lot of cases we don't want to recognize that, but as you watch, just see how much of this you relate to, because as I learned more about the IBLP, I certainly was not raised in that level of a religious setting, but there were a lot of things that I could relate to. Like this, that it's not always just about actions in the IBLP. A lot of times they're talking about your thought life. Even experiencing sexual desire is framed as dangerous and sin in your heart. Emotional intimacy is considered as giving away your heart, and modesty rules are incredibly strict, especially for the girls, mostly for the girls. But if a man has lustful thoughts, then it's her fault for causing him to stumble, not his fault for not monitoring his thought life. There's an unfair burden placed on the women in this way. And for the boys, are they left free in this? No. They're told that their sexuality is a battle that they would never be able to win. That lust is always lurking in the corner, and that women's bodies are a threat, and that their purity depended on controlling not just their actions, but their eyes, their minds, and even their dreams, their thoughts. If you guys are interested, I made a video on this called The Monetization of Sexual Shame. I talk a lot about how this is something that churches will use to control the members, but specifically men. Women too, I think that this really is relevant conversation for women as well, because statistically we know that women are watching porn at the same rates as men are, and they struggle with their sexuality or sex-related, compulsive issues at the same rate as men, and so yeah, it would be worth it for you guys to go check that out. But the IBLP really capitalizes on this. And the result of it ends up being that people enter marriages with intense shame around sex. How can you go into a marriage thinking that you are already a porn addict because you have watched porn a few times in your life, or that because you struggle with masturbation, which is not a struggle, it is just a normal biological process for a lot of people, and it's not, you wanting to do it doesn't mean that you are doing anything wrong, that you're lacking spiritually. It just means that your body's actually working correctly. How can you then go into a marriage and want to jump in headfirst into a sexual relationship and be able to be open and communicative and have fun with it? How can you do those things when your whole life you've been monitored and shamed and broken down, told that you are sexually broken? It can also lead to people staying in abusive relationships because they feel like they gave away too much. This is a story that is super common. A lot of times, religious young women, if they end up going too far, like I said, if they end up maybe sleeping with somebody premaritally, they may feel like, well, I can make this right by marrying this person, never having any other partners, and so they will stay in a bad relationship or where they're being treated very poorly or being abused because they don't want to face the stigma of having had other partners. It can also result in people being unable to really date or form super healthy attachments because they were never taught how. And for queer people, there was simply no place in this framework for them. Non-straight identities were considered perversions or demonic influence, and the message was clear that you needed to obey the rules, repress your sexuality, or try to cast out the demons that were causing your problems, but you really just couldn't live that life. You couldn't be yourself in that environment. Purity culture in the IBLP wasn't ever about protecting people. It was about controlling them.
Except for we're already married. Okay, you can sit down. It is natural to want to be married. That is a God-given desire. But it is not natural for a Christian to put anything before loving God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. And girls, with our minds, we really struggle with living in a fantasy world. Yeah, you with me? We fantasize about who we're going to marry, and Does he like me? Does she like me? And we get so caught up sometimes when really we need to be studying to show ourselves approved unto God and focus on loving God and serving him and realizing that, you know what? It's not our place to find a mate. It's God's place. And there is nothing as wonderful as being pursued by the one that loves you, because if you pursue him and you get him to like you back, what are you going to do when you're married? When you're married and you have a lot of little ones, do you want a husband that's going to pursue you and love you and be interested in the things you're interested in? Well, then wait and step back and guard your heart and let him pursue you and pursue your parents and pursue God. Because there are times I knew for almost 2 years that Josh was probably the one God had for me. I felt it in my heart. I believed it. My dad felt the same way. And when my dad talked with me, he said, don't tell mommy, don't tell anyone else, but you pray for him every day. And I did. But you know, I also gave that desire back to the Lord.
Especially women and especially children. And the shame it left behind has taken years, if not decades, for people to unlearn. And it's seeped into other areas of the culture and caused harm there too. Like I've said, and I keep reiterating, you've probably heard some of these statements before. You've probably heard about the umbrella. I remember the umbrella being shown in my church time and time again. I've actually used the umbrella in other videos of mine because it's so familiar to me. I didn't realize that it was specific to IBLP. It bleeds into Christian culture and impacts everything. The truth is that we know our worth is not tied to our sexuality or what we've done with our bodies or what we haven't done with our bodies. And we know that our bodies aren't threats and that people looking at our bodies should control themselves. And that love, real, healthy love, does not require shame as a foundation. It does not require control. At the heart of the IBLP is a culture of fear, and that's probably not going to come as a surprise to you if you've made it this far in the video. They have a fear of the world, fear of rebellion, fear of stepping outside of God's perfect will, which was somehow always exactly what Gothard said it was. People raised in the IBLP weren't just taught right from wrong. They were taught that disobedience would literally bring spiritual attack, sickness, broken relationships, financial ruin, or spiritual warfare, like I've said before. So people learned to suppress their feelings, their sexuality, their true desires. They learned to obey and to never question Gothard's authority.
Psalm 1. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth its fruit in its season.
Its leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper.
But the ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind drives away.
Girls were taught that modesty was their highest virtue, not because it honored God, but because it protected men from stumbling. Boys were taught to be spiritual leaders before they were ever taught how to be emotionally present or intelligent. And emotions themselves, highly suspect. Anger was rebellion. Sadness was self-pity. Depression was seen as the result of hidden sin or bitterness, incorrect heart posture, or being in the wrong spirit. Never was it seen as something that you might want to go seek therapy for, because therapy, especially secular therapy, was seen as worldly and dangerous. People who grew up in the system weren't just taught a list of do's and don'ts. They were taught that disobedience has spiritual consequences. It creates a low-level anxiety that colors everything. And the only way to stay safe is to stay in total submission to God, yes, but more so to the people above you in the IBLP hierarchy. Your husband, your pastor, the IBLP, your dad, whoever it might be. Bill Gothard. The fear doesn't just impact how you feel, it also shapes how you interact with the outside world. Like, being told to avoid secular music for you and your children, cutting all the Disney music out of your house or the Disney movies, burning your CDs, choosing not to go to a public college or the college that you would have really liked to go to. Anything outside of the IBLP bubble is really seen as dangerous. This kind of isolation makes it so hard for the people in it to imagine anything different, because if you're told that the rest of the world is under Satan's influence, why would you go looking for answers there? Why would you want to go anywhere near it? So you stay and you keep practicing in their system. And when it came to mental health, things like anxiety, depression, and trauma, they weren't psychological. They were spiritual failings. If you were anxious, it meant that you didn't trust God enough. And if you were depressed, it was probably because of your unforgiveness. And if all of that wasn't enough, the IBLP also has a long and very well documented history of abuse. It's not just about one man, it's about an entire system that protected predators and silenced victims, all under the guise of keeping a good witness for Christ. In IBLP circles, this abuse was often hidden or redefined. If a child came forward about being abused, the first question wasn't, "Are you okay?" It was, "What did you do to provoke it? What did you do to seek out your correction? Have you forgiven them?" Victims were taught to see themselves as part of the problem, and abusers are shielded. This is what happens when an institution prioritizes its image over the people that are in its group, when obedience is valued more than safety, when forgiveness is demanded before accountability is ever even discussed. If you were raised in or raised adjacent to the IBLP, you know that the fallout does not leave when you leave. Deconstruction isn't just about changing your mind. It's about untangling years or decades of fear-based thinking. It's about learning to trust yourself again after being told that your heart is deceitful above all things for your entire life. It's about letting yourself feel anger, feel sadness, feel grief, maybe allowing yourself to hate someone for 2 seconds if they're mean to you, and realizing that you're not a terrible, sinful person because of that, and that it actually just makes you human. Many people that leave the IBLP world or worlds similar to it find themselves in a kind of spiritual free fall. It's hard to regain your footing once you leave a high control religious group or a fundamentalist religious perspective. And when we start to question, that fear doesn't go away overnight. But the truth is that you are not wrong for leaving and exploring other things. You are not wrong for putting yourself first, and you're not wrong for taking care of your mental health, taking medication, or going to a licensed counselor. Please, for the love of God, you guys go to licensed counselors. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me through this one. I know that it was a lot, and yeah, because it is a lot. The IBLP hurts people. It built a system that says it's going to help people and is disguised as holiness, but actually just controls people and hurts them. And it leaves a legacy that many of us are still recovering from or seeing the impacts from in adjacent religious communities. So if you're in that place, if you're unlearning, if you're grieving a religion or a religious past, or if you're just questioning, I see you and I hear you and this space is for you. Deconstruction is a very isolating and lonely place, and hopefully the comment section can be a safe space for you guys to share your stories and support each other. I am very active in the comments because I really do love having these conversations with you guys, so if you comment, I most likely will reply to you. Please share your story. I would love to hear about it. Don't forget to like my video and subscribe, or double check to make sure that you're subscribed if you're not already. We are allowed to speak up about these things, you guys, talk about them, and also draw parallels with our own experiences, and I would love to hear about yours. I've heard a lot of parallels between ex-Mormons and actually a lot of IBLP content as well, and I know that I do have some ex-Mormon followers or subscribers, so if you are in that boat, would love to hear from you as well. Alright, you guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. All of the love has meant so much to me. If you don't know what to comment and you want to support, feel free to drop a bird in the comments. A lot of you have been doing that, and it definitely helps the algorithm or the engagement a ton. And yeah, I'll see you guys next week.
So something right now I've been really interested in reading about and theorizing about has been religion in Bikini Bottom. And as you can imagine, it's a very vast topic, so I don't really have any conclusions of my own right now. I think I need to do more reading and watching about it, but there is something that I found really interesting that I would like to share with everybody and kind of gauge opinions about. So the first part of this is that I can say with a fair amount of certainty that churches do, or at least have at some point existed in Bikini Bottom. Some people are going to disagree with this because there has never been an episode where the characters in the current timeline go to an actual real location of a church. But there's evidence that supports that there are churches in Bikini Bottom society. One of the first examples of this is the play where SpongeBob and Sandy get married. Yes, it is a play, but the setting of the play is that of a church. There's a fish dressed as a priest, there is stained glass. It clearly is representing some sort of idea of a Christian church, which if that didn't exist at one point at least, why would that be the setting? But the other example of this, which I want to focus on, is there's a dream sequence where Squidward is imagining this relationship with a Krabby Patty, and he imagines getting married to the Krabby Patty. And again, this happens in a church. There is a fish dressed as a priest, and again, there's stained glass. What I find so interesting about this is in the stained glass, there are anchors. And in my mind, that would usually be where the cross iconography would be in a traditional Christian church. And here it's replaced by an anchor, which is fascinating to me. You could definitely make an argument that this was just like a fun little, thing, Easter egg that the writers included because they didn't want to show a cross in a children's cartoon, whatever. But to me, I think it's very interesting to think about in the context of Bikini Bottom's religion, because as we all know, crosses are so central to Christianity as a symbol because that's where Jesus was crucified. That's where he died for all of our sins, and in doing so effectively saved all of humanity. And so if we are to therefore assume that because of the existence of a Christian-esque church in Bikini Bottom, that their religion is following the traditional Judeo-Christian lore, but with some sort of aquatic animals in place of all of the biblical figures. Like there is some sort of aquatic version of Abraham and some sort of aquatic version of Jonah. I really wonder what this means about the sea version, the Bikini Bottom version. Now, the role of King Neptune in Spongebob is especially nebulous because of several factors, one being that there's 3 different portrayals of him throughout the series and movies, and another being that the fish themselves in the series can't even seem to agree upon what he is. There's a whole scene where 2 fish are debating about whether Neptune is real or not, but he definitely is some sort of figure of mythicality or holiness. We can gauge this by the fact that he has powers, number 1, and 2, there are many references where fish say like, "Oh my Neptune," which can be equivalent to like, "Oh my God" in our world. And therefore, I can see Neptune, at least the Neptune in my mind, being the original one portrayed in the series, not any of the movies or other spin-offs. I can see him as being some sort of Jesus figure in whatever the religion might be. And I see this because he is, part human and part fish. He's a merman. And in the same way that Jesus was both the Son of God, he was himself God, and he also had flesh and blood like ours. He had attributes of a god and of man. And that's sort of the same thing that King Neptune portrays in Spongebob. And if we are to assume then that he is Jesus, it makes me wonder if his death was related to an anchor in some way. I don't know if maybe he was nailed to an anchor in the same way that Jesus was. And in my line of thinking, I can kind of imagine this as being him being tied to an anchor and thrown off by a boat and landing in Bikini Bottom, or Atlantis, I think is where he lives in the show. I settle on this lore specifically because of the fact that we see that a lot of the material or a lot of the resources they have in Bikini Bottom are due to things dropping from ships, things dropping and falling from sailors' possessions. The first example of this that comes to mind for me would be the pencil that falls from the one ship that SpongeBob then uses to draw Doodlebob. So could it be possible then that Neptune kind of fell from the human realm, you know, tied to an anchor, into the world of Bikini Bottom, into the world of the ocean as a whole, and rose again as this sort of Jesus-like figure? Maybe. Again, I don't have any real conclusions about this. I just really enjoy thinking about it. So I would love to know what everyone's thoughts are on this, if there are any like different interpretations. Yeah, let me know. I look forward to hearing